Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human cognition.
Good to be back.
It has been a busy period, hasn't it? We've spent weeks examining individual cognitive biases, attention deficits, all that. But the real power comes when you zoom out.
Right. When you look at society as a whole, and there's this one question that just, it persists across every culture, every era.
The concept of a higher power belief.
Exactly. And when we analyze the brain's fundamental algorithms, how we categorize, how we hunt for causation, you immediately run into these massive, deeply rooted systems that really define civilization.
So our discussion today is dedicated to the mechanics behind all that. We're treating this not as theology, but purely as a study of these huge, persistent cognitive structures.
We're interested in the function, not the faith.
Precisely. So to start, let's establish the framework we're dissecting. We're focusing on the common definition you find in the Abrahamic traditions.
An entity that dictates morality, sends messengers, prophets.
Right? Imposes consequences like heaven and hell and knows everything. That structure gives us a really consistent cognitive model to examine.
It does, and that's the framework that establishes the role of the messenger.
Which is interesting because you see this historical pattern where the sources often point to this regional concentration of these figures. They seem to emerge from the Middle East. If the messages are universal, why the geographical focus?
Well, that regional focus is an interesting data point, but it becomes a lot less mystifying when you look at the function of the person.
Not just their title.
Exactly. If you broaden the lens, the role of the messenger is essentially that of the admonisher or the warner for the collective.
Okay, so you're saying figures like Socrates challenging Athenian norms, or Confucius establishing moral codes, or even Buddha, they're all fulfilling a similar societal function.
They are. Their task is to research truth and then translate that truth into something actionable for everyone else. But this brings us to the first crucial cognitive observation, and it's one that often, surprises people. The ultimate concept of God is an invention of man.
Wait, hang on. An invention? That's a strong claim. I mean, given the sheer historical weight, how can we reduce something so profound to a psychological coping mechanism?
It's not a reduction, though. It's about identifying the psychological imperative. See, the human mind is fundamentally incapable of tolerating a void in what you could call the cause drawer.
The cause drawer.
Yeah, we are just wired to seek a final, ultimate cause for existence. If the cause is unknown, our cognitive system creates a proxy. Doesn't matter if you fill that drawer with randomness, the Big Bang, or divine will, the drawer must be filled.
So the search for God is really a symptom of our hardwired need to assign a reason to reality. We manufacture causes because our internal logic demands it.
Absolutely. The mind literally creates deities to satisfy this necessity. It has to establish a beginning and an end to the sequence.
So if the concept bubbles up from inside us, how does it get so entrenched in society, externally? The research suggests most people just inherit their faith, like an heirloom.
It's cultural inheritance. It's the default setting. You're born into a language, a set of social customs, maybe a loyalty to a football team.
And a religious framework.
It provides immediate meaning, cohesion, and it is incredibly sticky.
I think we all know someone who, even after they've rejected the core dogma, they still feel that powerful pull when they hear an old hymn or something. That cultural wiring is deep.
That's the key. We see this phenomenon. The sources call them Muslim atheists or Christian atheists. They reject the theology, but the deep cultural framework is just inescapable, especially in a crisis.
So trying to fight that inherited framework is what? Counterproductive?
It really is.
Yeah.
The idea is to understand that architecture. Once you accept it, you can build a conscious, reasoned personality on top of it, instead of wasting all your energy fighting these cultural ghosts.
But that brings us to the conflict, doesn't it? If the core messages, love, charity, community, are so similar across these systems, why on earth do we see such extreme division and, frankly, hatred?
Because the divine concept becomes a mirror. This is the crucial principle. Everyone's God is an exaggerated version of themselves. The deity reflects the psychology of the believer, or the society.
Wow, that really shifts the responsibility back onto the individual.
Entirely. Look at history. Societies defined by warfare. They invent aggressive, invasive gods of conquest who justify what they're already doing.
And societies built on agriculture.
They tend to create more forgiving, nature-aligned deities. It's a psychological feedback loop. And this is where we see the enormous danger of simplification. When you take this complex, profound guidance and reduce it to a simple caricature, and ism, it's destroyed.
You mean like taking Marxist philosophy and turning it into dogmatic Marxism?
Exactly that. Or turning spiritual guidance into violent fundamentalism. The complexity is necessary for deep, personal meaning, but it's too much for mass consumption. So it gets flattened into simple ideology, a vehicle for conflict.
Which makes the whole process of interpretation absolutely critical. If these texts are supposed to be understood by everyone, why is it so contradictory? One person reads a passage and sees a call for peace. Another reads the exact same words and sees a justification for terrorism.
The problem is rarely the text itself. The insight here is that a book is only clear based on the reader's knowledge of the world.
Not on its own inherent nature.
No. The meaning is contingent on the reader's contextual literacy. It's a prerequisite. I mean, think of it this way. You could have a perfectly clear recipe for a cake, but if it's written in ancient Akkadian, a language you don't know.
The clarity is useless, you can't bake the cake.
Exactly. World knowledge is the language you need to interpret any great message, whether it's spiritual or scientific.
And this focus on personal knowledge, it connects right into this idea of a post-prophetic era, the adulthood of humanity.
It's a really powerful conceptual shift. The message, particularly in the source culture, is that humanity has moved past needing constant external handholding. We've grown from a state of childhood, sometimes the term used is TEFL, to intellectual maturity.
Meaning we no longer have the luxury of intellectual laziness.
Precisely. We are now obligated to use our own reason, our akal.
Yeah.
We can't just rely on external authorities, priests, clergy, whoever. The responsibility for understanding the world now rests on the individual.
So the era of passively wearing someone else's glasses to look at the world is over.
It has to be. I mean, think about every great thinker, Darwin, Marx, religious founders. They all got their insights by looking at nature, at humanity, and recording their own rigorous observations. The responsibility now is to apply that same rigor yourself.
Your knowledge has to be gained through your own eyes.
Or it's fundamentally useless to you.
Yeah. This feeds directly into that classic dilemma, the source of morality. People so often claim that ethical behavior requires God. From a cognitive standpoint, is morality dependent on belief?
Well, the origins of the word morality, or ahlak, in the sources tradition, it challenges that. It comes from the root hawk, which means creation. So ahlak just means any behavior that's appropriate to a creature's nature.
So like a cat cleaning itself, that's it acting ethically, according to its own nature.
Exactly. So religion's function isn't to create morality. It's to efficiently distribute a prepackaged ethical system. Most people just don't have the time or the background to develop their own complex ethical algorithms from scratch.
It's a necessary shortcut.
It is. Follow these rules and you'll generally function well in the system.
But if we move past those packaged rules, is there a universal definition of good that's independent of a specific decree?
There is. The sources point to a standard articulated by Aldo Leopold. Good is defined as anything that supports the diversity, life, and beauty of existence. Anything that works against those things is bad.
That is a powerful metric. It just cuts across all cultural and doctrinal lines. It means, say, destroying a rainforest is inherently bad, no matter what your scripture says.
Right. It applies everywhere. It moves morality out of the abstract, what my tribe allows, and into the concrete, what supports the maximum potential for life.
Okay, before we wrap up, we have to touch on the ultimate interface. The brain versus the soul, or Ru. If our soul is our essence, why can physical brain damage, say, to the frontal lobe, so radically change a person's moral behavior?
Right. Does the soul just get erased?
Yeah.
The term Ru itself is fascinating. Sometimes it's linked to Raiha, which means scent or essence. It's the great mystery. But brain damage doesn't mean the soul is erased. It means the implementer interface is broken.
The brain is the hardware that the essence runs on.
Precisely. If your frontal lobe, which governs impulse control, is damaged, the underlying potential is still there, but the ability to express it is impaired. The interface is broken.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, finally, let's talk about the most common action in these systems. Prayer, or dua. If the ultimate cause knows everything, why pray? It feels counterintuitive, like you're trying to bribe fate.
And that's the common cognitive error, the need to bribe or change external reality. Prayer, in its most functional sense, isn't directed upward, it's directed inward. We can distinguish between two forms.
The verbal one, kavli dua, where you ask for help.
Yes, and the far more critical one, fili dua. Action prayer. This is the act of immediately starting the work to achieve your goal. You pray for a new house. Fili dua is starting to save money.
So the prayer is actually the first step you take yourself.
Its core function is to reinforce your trust, your iman, in the system. and crucially, in yourself. It's a powerful affirmation to your own mind declaring your intent. It bridges the gap between a passive wish and active work.
Which brings us to that final distinction between types of knowing. We have ilim, which is knowledge based on evidence.
And then there's arfan, inner knowing, trust. It's that intuitive connection that goes beyond empirical proof. You might use the ilim to study physics, but you rely on irfan to trust without needing daily proof that your mother loves you. You need both.
It requires constant personal effort, constant intellectual challenge. So if we synthesize everything we've talked about, from the psychological need to create a god to the necessity of personal reason, the path away from ignorance and conflict seems pretty clear.
It lies in seeking knowledge and applying reason, not in passively following an inherited framework or waiting for some external savior. That waiting, that's what the sources call the lazy intellect.
To truly understand the ultimate cause, you have to understand its creation. If you want to know what it's doing, you have to study nature, humanity, the cosmos itself.
Which means science is the most direct way of speaking with the ultimate cause. It demands intellectual rigor, constant questioning, and a forward-thinking awareness. Use your reason, apply your knowledge, and look through your own eyes. That is the only path.